further ado, I welcome Mark Turner to this distinguished lectures, The Meaning of Meaning. So welcome, Mark. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Sergio, and the entire committee. See, it would be a little strange for Sergio to call me Professor Mark Turner because he and I are friends. We have met in Mexico when I was last in Mexico City, giving a couple of weeks set of lectures at a number of universities. And to see my friend from Mexico suddenly calling me Professor Mark Turner would be a little bit of a surprise. I'm so grateful to you all for doing the work in these difficult times to make it possible for us to continue our research. So I will start sharing my screen. And what I would most like to say is that you don't have to worry about making any notes. This is recorded. And more than that, you will find the answers, or at least all the answers that I know already on my website. All you have to remember is my name is Mark Turner, and you can go to markturner.org and you will see all the books and you can download most of the articles. And if you're really a glutton for torture, you can see lots of these kinds of recorded talks. There's no limit to the vast ocean of information that you can get on this website and other websites. So we will leave time for discussion at the end. And remember, I'm Mark Turner, and you can go to markturner.org. So here is my website. As I mentioned, markturner.org, you can just go there. And the basis for this talk is the invitation from mi amigo, Professor Sergio Sanchez Padilla, who wrote something that I found very useful. He said, "For better and worse, I have found a deep disconnection between the field of linguistics and that of EFL, English as a Foreign Language instruction. This puzzles me as there are literally millions of people around the world doing their best to learn English as a foreign or second language. I'm aware of a few attempts here and there at bridging this gap, be it in the form of journals, association books, and so on. And yet the message is not getting across. Our intended public is English teachers of the UNAM, both at the high school, that's the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, both at the high school, undergraduate, and graduate level. So the only caveat that we would beseech our lecturers to consider is that an extremely technical and specialized lecture would most probably have little echo in our community. So this is going to be an entry-level presentation about an all-important question, one that is at the center of learning and teaching languages. So traditional second language learning is extremely important, and many, many people are dedicated to it all over the world. And I work with these people. In China, there's a team I work with. China has 1.4 billion people, and they are largely dedicated to learning English. It's the same in most of the countries I go to. And I see the work they do. And it's quite interesting to me that the field of second language instruction attracts such dedicated, saintly teachers who work and work and work. They spend their time, they work with their students, they correct their papers. It's a wonderful example of human teaching and expertise, and makes me feel good, right? So the problem is not lack of work. The students are working, the teachers are working. And these days, there's an awful lot of innovative technology to try to help people. So there are PDF books, and there are, Duolingo and interactive this and that. it turns out to be very expensive in time, money, and energy if we were to look at all the resources that are being expended around the world right now for second language learning. It's simply vast. It's incredible. It's continental, oceanic. But the problem is that with clear exceptions, we mostly don't get the results we want. In the United States, for example, most students go through 3 or 4 years of second language instruction, sometimes more, beginning in junior high school, but come out after they've graduated not being able to say anything, right? They can say, hello, how are you? That's about it. And people make jokes about it, right? It's very, very difficult in China for people to learn of the rhythms and prosody and intonations of a language like English, but they're all dedicated to it. There's vast systems at every one of these universities. All of the normal universities have great wings of teachers trying to teach this. So I am actually someone who can identify with all this. I have studied in my life, sometimes seriously, Latin and a range of Romance languages, Spanish, French, Italian, Provençal, which was a language spoken in what is now the south of France in the 13th century. I can recite poetry in Provençal and sing a little bit of it on my guitar. I know a little bit of Portuguese, both Brazilian and European. English is, of course, a Germanic language. So I know a little bit of German, much more Norwegian and Old English, and some Icelandic. And I studied Greek, classical Greek and Demotic Greek, and some phrases in other languages, Chinese, Japanese, Turkish, and Arabic. And I've spent a fair amount of time with it, but it's really pathetic. It's very sad. My ability to speak and in other languages than English is really much less than I would have hoped for, given all the work that I have put in. Right, so my house is full of technical books from traditional language teaching for French, for instance. You know, and I can speak some French. I gave 4 lectures at the Collège de France in French. And at the end of each, I thought I was going to get to answer the questions in English. They would ask in French and I would answer in English, but they said, non, non, nous ne comprenons pas, il faut parler français. This was from people that I knew perfectly well spoke English expertly. And I have to say, it was murderously difficult for me. It was one of the most exhausting experiences of my life. And it hasn't gone away. Last year, I got an honorary degree from a French university, and I accepted it and gave my speech, 15 minutes in French. It's really astonishingly difficult for me, right? Why should that be? I have books, scholarly books on Provençal, on Italian. Here's Anacreon's Hymn to Artemis. Lots of these books are in foreign languages are full of my writing, right? So here's all this Old English from Beowulf. And of course in Spanish too, right? From the Poema del Cid to Neruda, right? From Sor Juana to Pacheco, across the landscape, I try to read these things and pay attention. And I also try to engage with popular culture like this. Yeah, and this is important. This is part of second language learning. Lucharé hasta el final de mi último día, right? We listen to these songs, Despacito, Los sacrificios que hago por ti. ¿Qué importa saber quién soy, ni de dónde vengo, ni hacia dónde voy? Right? Volando vengo, volando voy. Everybody listens to these things, right? Como lo sabía yo, tengo lo que tú quieres. But with all this work, the result is still quite poor, quite difficult, right? And this has included even things like phrase books. So I travel in Greece an awful lot, and I have been since I was 16. So this is, of course, not classical Greek. This is Demotic Greek. There are lots of these little phrase books. So you don't know how to operate. You go into the hotel and you want to ask, do you have a room for me? And you say, Mukratisate domatio? And then you want to say you made a reservation. Sase dopoisa taxudromikos. That's by mail. Telefonikos is by phone, right? Okay. All of these traditional attempts, memorizing paradigms, hablaré, hablarás, hablará, hemos, hablarán, or hikai kok, huyas, 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 all this kind of memorization, learning grammar, learning vocabulary, and trying to put them together. So extremely important, lots of dedicated work by all parties, work sometimes, very innovative technologies like books. It's very expensive, and with exceptions, the results are not what we would hope in our students, right? And I'm one of those students. So does cognitive linguistics offer a way forward? Does it have anything to offer? Second language teaching, this is the question that has been posed to me, right? Is there something we can say? We do a lot of linguistics. Does it say anything about learning a language that we might use? And I'm going to say, yes, I hope so. And essentially, what I'm going to say is that some kind of usage-based construction grammar offers an idea for what it means to learn a language and accordingly how we should teach it. And if you would like to see some publications on these ideas, here are a couple of very recent ones. Remember, these are on my website. You can download them, and this is being recorded, okay? And the background here is a conception of language or any communicative system, including speech and gesture, signs, gaze, touch. Knowing a communicative system is knowing a relational network of form, meaning pairs, and how they blend. I'm going to talk about that tonight. So what are our human linguistic abilities, and what's their source, and how can we investigate it, given that although there are many animals that communicate and they're quite astonishing, there's no robust animal model for the amazing human performance that all cognitively modern human beings can do. Well, Nick Enfield at the International Conference in Cognitive Linguistics in Japan had this slide, and I took a picture. What we would like to do in cognitive linguistics is ground language in more general cognition. So what kind of cognition am I talking about? Let's start with the concept of joint attention. And I recommend to you the work of Michael Tomasello on joint attention. Joint attention is when multiple people are paying attention to the same thing, and they know that they're all paying attention to the same thing. And they feel that they are interacting with each other by paying attention to the same thing. Classic joint attention is when you have just a few people and they're in the same place, in the same time, in the same ground, and they're communicating a little bit. Now, maybe they're not communicating very much. Maybe they see something and one looks at the other and looks at it and raises an eyebrow. It's still a comment. Point is, they both know that they have minds. They both know that they have attention. They both know that they have a viewpoint and that their viewpoints are different. But in joint attention, which is not just the same as group attention, in joint attention, they are paying attention to something that they can perceive in their own ground, and they're getting each other's attention and directing it to that thing and making a comment about it. So a classic would be a mother says to a child, "Look, Jesus, that blackbird in the hedge has red stripes on its wings. And the mother looks at the bird and looks back at Jesus, and looks at the bird and looks back at Jesus and points, right? That's classic joint attention. And what I want to say is this is a root capacity for cognitively modern human beings. They are off the charts in their ability to do this. It's almost what they're built for. And they do not have to use language in order to do it. On the contrary, if you want to know about classic joint attention in some detail, you can look at Clear and Simple as the Truth, the book that I wrote with Francis Noel Thomas. In the studio, it talks about grounding writing in classic joint attention. You can also see this paper, Multimodal Form Meaning Pairs for Blended Classic Joint Attention. It's a few years old. You can download it from my website if you want to study further about classic joint attention. Now, here is an example of classic joint attention, and you'll understand this. This is a baby in the species that Yoda comes from, and Yoda has just been left in this classroom where a robot is teaching because somebody needs to take care of Yoda. So Yoda is going to look over and see cookies, that the girl has cookies. And he's going to get the attention of the girl, of the student, and direct her attention to the cookies. So now they have joint attention on the cookies. And then look her in the eye. Now this is already communicating a little story, no language. And that story is, give the cookie to me. Move the cookie to me. Give me the cookie. Now she's going to say no, but she wouldn't have to even say a word. She could just look wrong. The surprise is, of course, that this Yoda species, it's a species that can move things with its own mind. So you don't have to hear anything. What I want you to do is watch the classic joint attention and the communication of a small story. Now see, there's almost no language here, but this is the root of language. Creating joint attention by getting someone else's attention, directing them their attention to something perceptible in the ground, and communicating a little story. The story here is a cause motion story. Pass the cookies over to me, right? And there's almost no language here, but the point is, this is the essence of language. Notice that he can make the story clear by holding out his hand. Now, holding out your hand is a form. It doesn't mean anything. Words, gestures don't have meanings, they're forms. So for instance, right now, the only thing that is happening is some retinas are striking, or some photons are striking your retina, and some longitudinal waves are striking your ear. And from those forms, you associate those forms with meaning. And you put together the meaning, but you are the one that has to put together the meaning. So the Yoda baby wants her to get the story, and he uses a form, namely putting out a hand, that will get her to activate that very simple story. Now, this classic scene of communication has been discussed by many people, and you can see all the references in the articles that I've sent you to. Let's just sort of recover joint attention and the ground discussed by somebody like Lanneker. Human beings are the only species that spend a tremendous amount of time trying to get the attention of conspecifics of other human beings and directing it toward something perceptible in their environment, right? And once you look at it, you see that you know all about this, and that a great deal of language is dedicated to managing classic joint attention. That we depend upon various kinds of words that don't really have a fixed meaning, right? Someone says, could you help me now with this? But who's the you? And who's the me? And what does it mean for something to be now? And what is this? That all has to be filled in by the joint attention that the people are sharing. It's not linguistic per se, right? We have lots of constructions, including gestural constructions, to try to regulate joint attention. Joint attention assumes that everybody who's in the situation has a viewpoint and that they are communicating about those viewpoints. Again, I can help you with that now by looking here. So what does now mean? You might think it just means the time of utterance, but it doesn't. I can show you many, many examples where it doesn't. Here, where's this here, right? So if someone understands classic joint attention and the scene of getting attention and directing it, right, then we have a place for language to start. Now, these scenes are always multimodal, right? Here's an example of a baby playing with an iPad, and the baby is communicating very well and expressing its wishes. The baby does not have language yet. So if we would like to teach people language, cognitive linguistics, that is usage-based construction grammar, would suggest that we always have to start by putting them in an actual scene of classic joint attention and making certain that it's multimodal, that this is what human beings are built for. It's the basis for how they can learn a language. So in classic joint attention, we communicate little stories. These little stories typically have force dynamics, like, I push the door. You stop me. They also have image schemas like source, path, goal, little stories. I go to the store, right? And There's a small number of agents and objects in these stories. And an example is cause motion. The basis of language is setting up little forms that can communicate for basic stories like caused motion. What you saw with the baby Yoda was caused motion. You hand the cookie to me. You pass the cookies towards me, right? And you can find out all about these little stories and how they relate to linguistic patterns and how we blend them parabolically in this book, Literary Mind. So this is what I'd like you to keep in mind as we go ahead. Now, in language, in a lot of languages, there will be a clause that's a cause motion clause. Noun phrase, verb phrase, noun phrase, prepositional phrase. You throw the ball over the fence. You push the cookie toward me, right? The first noun phrase typically has an agent. The verb will carry either the causal action or the means or something related to causing the motion, or the motion that is caused. There's an object that's acted on and it goes in a direction. You throw the ball over the fence. You push the cookie toward me, right? So we would want people to begin by learning with whatever capacities they have to express the basic small stories of human life, right? We also have the ditransitive. I could talk about these in a lot of languages. What I'm focusing on is that every language has certain patterns for expressing what we would think of as a small story in a scene of classic joint attention. So noun phrase, verb, noun phrase, noun phrase. You throw me the ball. You hand me the cookie. These are called clausal constructions. And constructions are things I learned about from Charles Fillmore, one of my professors. A construction is just a form meaning pair. When someone uses the word throw, it's a form, and you associate it with a meaning. But similarly, when someone uses the grammatical form, noun phrase, verb phrase, noun phrase, prepositional phrase, that syntax is associated with caused motion. You can use it for things that aren't caused motion, as we'll get to in a minute, but that would be the place to start. I would recommend Ron Laniker's Foundations of Cognitive Grammar, because it is a usage-based theory that suggests that what human beings do in learning something is to get a small number of form meaning pairs that are not very lexically filled, that at the beginning are only used for a few variations. These are things like which means I want that, or want milk, want mama, want mama, want mama. And if you look at Michael Tomasello's Constructing a Language, a book which I recommend, which I have right here, you'll see that the evidence and the data on this suggests strongly that when a human being acquires a grammatical form, at first is very specific. It only pivots later. So it might be want ball, want ball, want ball, want ball. And it becomes want mama, want mama, want mama. And only a few other words come in over time. But we would say that the child commands that construction, has that basic construction, doesn't know about conjugating verbs or using the right pronoun or declining nouns. All that comes later. Doesn't have a grammar, doesn't have a vocabulary, but does have classic joint attention, the idea of small stories and basic ways to communicate those stories. And it is this basis that makes it possible to add on the other sorts of things. To know a communicative system is to know a relational network of form meaning pairs and how they blend. But we learn those form meaning pairs in small increments, making certain that they're very well learned before we expand them. And this can go on for an entire lifetime. Gradual building of relational network of form meaning pairs and a knowledge of how they blend. Now, what do I mean by blending? The same thing that I discuss as parable in the literary mind. Discuss this in the way we think, with Gilles Fauconnier, and in the origin of ideas. So these are all about blending. But here's an example of a blend. We have the story of the world and everything that's happening in the world, but we also have the story of a virus. Now, this is not a metaphor. This doesn't suggest to us that the Earth is a virion. We don't really think that we're supposed to understand that satellites are little spikes on a virus. But we're blending two stories here. And in the blended story, we know that the pandemic, that the virus has gone global. Here's another immediate kind of blending of two stories. So we have the idea of the pandemic and global financial markets and the Dow Jones Industrial Average. The Dow yesterday just soared above 30,000. And a market in which assets are going up in value is called a bull market. And so here's a bull, and it says Dow. So, the stock market is not a bull, but this bull gets sick, and it has the little face mask, right? The bull gets sick, the market gets sick, and there's a girl behind who stands for the, fearless girl statue that was put next to an actual statue of the bull on Wall Street, says sell. So what we understand here is that there's one little story in which somebody sees somebody who's sick, concludes what's going on, and makes a decision. That's a small little story with two agents. But there's also the huge story of the world market. We blend them, we compress them. Now we know that, oops, somebody sees the consequences of the pandemic and decides to sell, and maybe the market will go down. You're very used to these with cartoons. So this is from Scandinavia, the world, in which the different countries are represented as people. So for example, Norway, it's Norway's birthday. Norway always has a fish. The fish has a little candle, right? And Denmark says, hey, happy birthday, Norway. I don't have anything for you, but here's a lottery ticket. And this is understood as Denmark giving Norway its independence. That's its birthday. And the lottery ticket, of course, turns out to be the fact that the Norwegians discovered lots and lots of oil in the North Sea and got to be very, very rich. So it's a story of a little birthday party and a gift, and the story of the geopolitics of the Scandinavian area. Human beings do this kind of blending all the time. It's almost what we're built for. Now let's go back to learning a language. So one of the things that we can do with our classic joint attention is we can have blended classic joint attention. You remember I said in classic joint attention, what you've got is a scene in which there are just a few people and they're trying to get each other's attention to direct that attention at something they can perceive in the environment and maybe to make a little comment about it. That's the basis. But of course, there are lots and lots and lots of communication like the one we're in right now that are not classic joint attention, or personal letters, or television, or a phone call. Those are not classic joint attention. Those are blended classic joint attention. That is, I might say, I want to talk to you about language. Now, is language something in our environment that we can both perceive? No. You could hear me speaking, but you can't see linguistics. Where is it? You can't perceive it. And you and I are not in the same ground anyway. But you can blend the idea of like linguistics with an object that you can perceive. And you can blend your ground and my ground and all of this technology into a scene in which it's as if we're having classic joint attention. We're not fooled. We know we're not. But human beings are very good at blended classic joint attention. This is why things like writing can seem to be communication. It's just a form, but you can connect it to human communication. Now, there are often lots of other things going on, but we understand the blended scene because we base it in the input of blended classic joint attention. So here's a very simple example. In a personal letter, somebody writes, I have your request before me, and you have my answer before you. Now, of course, the time at which the one person is writing the letter and the other person is reading it are two different times. But in the letter, you can use the present tense for both of them, because in the blend, you're both present. You're not fooled. But the blend is very useful. Personal letters are blended classic joint attention. So are things like painting. It's almost impossible to resist when you look at this painting that the agent, John the Baptist here, is not looking at you and trying to direct your attention to something, right? This is the basis of a lot of ads. If you notice that in the left, her eye is looking at the shampoo. And this is a heat map of where people look when they see this. If her eye is looking at the shampoo, then the eyes of the viewer go back and forth because it's a joint attention scene. If her eye is looking straight out at you, then the eyes of the viewer don't go back and forth. All of these kinds of things, blended classic joint attention. And it's the basis of song. So when the Rolling Stones are singing, it is not the case that you're in classic joint attention, but you have blended classic joint attention. Who is the person speaking?
Pleased to meet you. Hope you guessed my name. But what's puzzling you is the nature of my game. So if you meet me, have some courtesy, have some sympathy, and some taste.
So, lessons so far for blended classic joint attention. Ground people, if you want people to learn a language, ground them in a scene of classic joint attention. Make certain that they can communicate little stories with as little language as they've got, and have them interact to do that. And gradually introduce them to blended classic joint attention after they've got the concept of classic joint attention and can communicate in that scene. For instance, telephone, writing, personal letters. We all know that there's a lot going on in a television network news broadcast, for example. But if you look at what's happening, all the constructions come down from classic joint attention to the actual network news, and you get things like this.
God ettermiddag og velkommen til en ekstra nyhetssending fra NRK Nyheter i forbindelse med at det har gått av en bombeeksplosjon i Oslo sentrum for en halv time siden. Det vi foreløpig vet at i regjeringskvartalet i Akersgata i Oslo så det vært en stor eksplosjon.
So, what's happening is he says hello. Good day. He's as if he's speaking just to you. It's blend. He's not actually in a scene with you. He can't see you. He doesn't know you. It seems as if he's looking to, but that's blended classic joint attention. He says, good day. We have a story for you. There has been a bomb explosion in Oslo. And then he showed you a picture. See, the picture is like the bird in the bush. Now I have got your attention directed to this picture, and we are going to talk about it. And this is the basis of all kinds of mediated, I'm just going to flip over all of these, all kinds of mediated attention. There's a lot of linguistics now. Here's an article that I participated in on how language for space and time and so on works in these scenes of blended classic joint attention. And sometimes one of the key things is that you don't need new language to express new concepts in blended classic joint attention. Sometimes it happens. So here's an example of when it does happen. The constructions come down. So this woman is going to use the word there, and you're going to see it here, right?
If you have any questions about getting the data from your old hard drive to your new hard drive, we made a video for you that covers the process, and we will link to it right there.
Now see, when she points there, the thing is not there and we know it. And it's put in by the agency afterward. And here's the word here. And one of the things we know about that word here is that if you click on it, then you can go to a link. This is a new construction for the internet. You can sometimes get new language, new meaning for constructions in blended classic joint attention. But now blending is also what we use to turn those basic stories into full communication. So I can say, Paul sneezed the napkin off the table, Junior sped the car around the Christmas tree. These are all cause motion. But now I can take almost anything where there's not even any motion involved, but I want to get you to understand it by blending it with caused motion. And then you get things like, I pointed him toward the door. Notice I didn't apply any force to make him go through the door. But you know you're still supposed to use the cause motion story, just like Yoda Baby, to try to understand this. Something happened and the result was a motion. Or they teased him out of the senses. Teases is not a motion verb. And senses are not something that you can physically leave. I will talk you through the procedure. I read him to sleep. They prayed the two boys home, right? So once you have these very basic stories that can be expressed with gesture and very basic constructions, then you can start to expand the range without losing them, without forgetting how they work, without being confused about their application. And indeed, without knowing conjugations or declensions or the right subject-verb agreement or the right noun-adjective agreement, but you still have them. And now you can start to expand them. And as you do, and this works for all of these kinds of things like ditransitives, Mary poured Bill some wine. Now, it doesn't say she handed it to Bill, but notice you assume that she did. I could say Mary poured Bill some wine, but he didn't see it, so he didn't get it. But if I say Mary poured Bill some wine, you think he got it. Why? Because you know this is a little story. This is a ditransitive story. It's like the cookies to the Yoda baby, right? But then again, you can expand it by parable. Paul made him a house, didn't hand it to him, right? She granted him his wish. A wish is not something you can actually receive physically, but you understand it as a ditransitive. She won him a prize. She bequeathed him a farm. She gave him a headache. This doesn't mean that she had a headache and then she gave it to him so she didn't have it anymore, like a book, right? This is blending. Adele Goldberg and many others have studied these kinds of blended constructions. Same thing for elaborate ditransitives, resultatives. Kathy painted the wall white, noun phrase, verb phrase, noun phrase, adjective. You know what it means. It doesn't mean Kathy painted the wall because she is white. It didn't mean that she painted the wall although she was white. It doesn't mean Kathy painted the wall because it was white. No, it means Kathy did some kind of work, you don't really know what, with the result that the wall became white. It's a resultative. And so once you have that little story, you can use it by blending for things like she kissed him unconscious, last night's meal made me sick, he hammered it flat, the earthquake shook the building apart, and you can use it for vast stretches of time and space like Roman imperialism made Latin universal. Right. Now, this kind of blending is what makes it possible for people to learn languages. So imagine the little child in the zoo who sees a lion and is not confused, right? Knows that the lion is not a kitty in the sense that it wouldn't try to pet the lion, it wouldn't get anywhere near the lion, but points at it and says kitty. And all the parents are charmed, but this is the equipotentiality of language. The child is not speaking the language right the way the adults would do it, but the child is learning the language. It's applying whatever vocabulary and whatever forms they have based in classic joint attention and little stories in order to express what's going on. Now, this will gradually over time get more sophisticated, but what we're not seeing here is a picture of traditional second language learning, where you learn a grammar and you learn a vocabulary. The way I've learned almost all the language I've learned is I studied a grammar book. You know, the first chapter was on the present indicative tense, and the second chapter was on the future tense, and the third chapter was on the preterite tense, and every chapter had a list of vocabulary that I was supposed to memorize. And we're somehow supposed to put these together, right? The picture we're seeing in cognitive linguistics is that this is not a mechanism by which people learn languages, which might be why, despite all of this incredibly dedicated work on everybody's part, very talented people, very dedicated people, we get suboptimal results. So the new direction in language learning would be ground the activity in classic joint attention, get people to communicate important little stories with as little language as possible and as little grammar as possible. And once a very basic construction with this is established with its stereotypic words for communicating a very basic story, keep working at it, working at it, working at it, and gradually extend it to accept more words, but not quickly. Gradually extend it to accept more words. So give cookie becomes give smile, want mama becomes want doggy, and then want friend. Now, via blending, we will gradually extend the range of the application of these constructions. Via blending, we'll gradually extend the ways in which the basic constructions combine. And here's the point. Grammar in this view is not something that to be taught. Grammar is for the analyst, it's for you and me, it's for the scientists, it's for the linguists. It's a little bit like studying planets. Planets can orbit the sun, but planets don't know how they're orbiting the sun. Physicists do, but planets don't. And in the same kind of way, the speaker can command the language, and we would say has a grammar, that the linguist and the teacher can pick out. But the speaker mostly doesn't know what that grammar is. It's amazing how little grammar native speakers of an of a language actually control. So grammar in this view is an emergent property of commanding a communicative system. And knowing a communicative system does not entail being able to analyze it in the way the scientist or the teacher would. This is cursive knowledge. The teacher knows the grammar and the vocabulary and thinks that the student needs to know those in order to learn the language. But maybe that is what we call cursive knowledge. That is, the teacher knows this and so thinks the students need to know this. Now, how would we ever pull this off? Well, it's easy. You just give everybody a companion in the native language who's in a scene of classic joint attention and just talks with them all the time. Doesn't try to teach them anything, just tries to interact with them about cookies and milk and this and that and the other. But we just don't happen to have all these teachers who can stay with students all the time, right? But there is a possibility. We're starting now to see futuristic technology of simulating a conversation in a virtual environment. Here, for example, is an avatar of Mark Turner. It will see people and it will talk a little bit like me, right? And there are already virtual reality language learning apps, but they're not at all like the approach I'm talking about, because they are essentially like these phrase books. So you go into the virtual language app, and the avatar there will ask you something, and there are only 3 things you can respond, and you can read them there, and you respond. So you're rehearsing little scripts, right? But there is the possibility that we can now begin to develop, Hen Lab is working on this, interaction in a virtual reality where there would be automatic speech recognition. This is actually very far advanced and not that hard. When you talk to your iPhone or Alexa or Google Home Assistant, it is parsing your language and it will answer you back, right? Automatic speech recognition for Spanish is very well advanced, for example, and that can be connected to brand new things like GPT-3. If you haven't heard about GPT-3, I encourage you to look it up, because GPT-3 is not scripted. You can start chatting with GPT-3 and it will talk back to you, and it will keep going on any subject you like. It's a little bit like the early ELIZA program, except ELIZA was all very canned, very limited. But no, GPT-3 will hold conversations with you in the language, and the grammar will be right. You will hear the right words, the right grammar, the right conjugations, the right clitics, the right reflexives, and things like that. And there's no reason that GPT-3 couldn't be hooked up to a speech production system. Now, in this case, and if you want to know about these things, you go to markturner.org and click on the red hen, and that will take you to Red Hen, and that will take you to Hen Lab, which will teach you about these things and how we work on them. The idea here is that language learning doesn't really fit into the classroom kind of schedule that we use for teaching chemistry, that 3 times a week, 45 minutes each. But that's how it's taught in the United States in the high schools. Realistic language teaching, learning takes place all the time. And so we'd like to see if we can develop systems that are automatic but sophisticated, according to which the speaker is trying to express things and the system is responding, but it's responding appropriately in the language to be learned. And as that develops and as the student gets capacity later on, maybe some months later, maybe later on we start to teach them a few things about grammar. Maybe later on we give them some word lists, but not at the beginning. Students maybe are misfooted when they're told, okay, now here's a present indicative sentence, here's an imperative, here's a question. This is what you do in order to make an indicative sentence into an interrogative sentence. This is not the way people learn languages. And so cognitive linguistics is suggesting classic joint attention, little stories, and small constructions for basic stories that get expanded. Simulation, grounded in classic joint attention, in a simulated ecologically valid ground that's interactive with an open-ended give and take based on communicating little stories with very little language and little emphasis on full approved production of grammatical correctness, gradually expanding the form-meaning pairs through blending. And the result is that the student gets an emergent grammar, but grammar is the last place or a very advanced place for the student to get to. It's not a place to begin. To know a communicative system is to know a relational network of form-meaning pairs and how they blend, but it's only the advanced speaker that has such a relational network of form-meaning pairs, or even begins to know consciously how they blend, as opposed to being able to do it in the backstage of cognition. Thank you very much.
Whoa, that's a lot of information packed in there, Mark. I think it's time to get questions from the audience. So anyone wanting to ask something to Mark, please type your questions preferably using capital
Yeah,
letters.
I read
in the
Spanish,
chat.
but if you can type in Spanish, and Sergio will just translate because he's
Yeah, for
really
sure.
good at that.
Thanks, Mark.
Jean Lopez Figueroa asks, have I tried this method with any success yourself? Yeah, in fact, I would say that, well, for all the languages that I have tried to speak, I would say that the ones where I have the most facility are not the ones where I spent the most time with the grammar and the vocabulary, but where I actually lived there. So I lived in Norway for a year. I've lived in Greece for a total of about 14 months. I have lived in France and so on. And it's in those places where I just went out into the community and actually had to interact with people, right? So here we're fishing, or here we are buying something, but not having a script, not looking up in the book, how do I pronounce this, or trying to remember, looking up in Duolingo for the word, but actually working it out with the person. Those are the only languages where I actually have any sort of facility. I would say that I can read a number of languages, but what it means for me to read a number of languages is that I have a dictionary and a grammar book, and I work it out. I can actually read French and Spanish without, and some Italian and so on without doing that. I can read a little Greek without doing that. But even Latin, which I studied and studied and studied, for Latin, for me to understand a Latin passage that I haven't, maybe not medieval Latin, a Latin passage that I haven't read before, I might not be able to do 30 lines an hour. It's as I say, it's really quite pathetic. It's very sad. It's incredibly slow for the amount of time that I have put in. So yeah, I have tried it, and it's just anecdotal. So we have lots of other questions here. We have the influence of culture in learning a new language. Do you think that culture, including language, modifies the way we think? Well,
can I interrupt for a second, Mark?
Yeah, go ahead.
We're not looking at you, and I think it could be a good moment to.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's it. We should definitely share the screen. Let me stop the screen share. Yeah, stop the screen share. Are you looking at me now?
Yeah, now we're looking at you.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, I just hadn't stopped the screen share. Thank you very, very much.
Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah, so there's so many great questions here. So somebody wants to know what's the best way to learn the English language. Well, it's to grow up somewhere where they speak English. So one of my co-authors, Gilles Fauconnier, who's a superb speaker of French, actually spent, I think when he was 11, 12, 13, and 14 in Toronto, Canada. So there he was, and it was English. His English is amazing. You can still hear the French accent. But his English is just amazingly supple. Oddly, there are things that he can't do. So of course, he can speak English with a French accent. That's not a problem at all. This is the sort of, Maurice Chevalier. And at this moment, we must understand each other. That's not hard for him to do at all. But what I can do is speak French with like a Texan accent, or French with a Californian accent. Et maintenant, nous allons voir un film, and it just makes his head explode. He just can't stand it, right? So the other thing to do is to get a good friend who's native in the other language and engage in that kind of speaking, right? And but I point out, it's not just the constancy of it. It's that you and the friend will be in scenes of classic joint attention, where things will be happening around you, and you will be interacting with them, and you will try to get each other's attention. And so an awful lot of learning language is just what you saw with Yoda. You say, hola, 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 mira, mira. This is already fundamentally basic. If people are not trying to get each other's attention and directing it to something in order to communicate about it, then you're not really in a scene where a human being is likely to learn language very well, right? This is why I say there's some hope that we could use three-dimensional HoloLens where there is an environment that the computer knows about and where the learner can speak and the system, the GPT-3 system, can speak back, and they can just keep going like that forever. Now, it's not that the computer understands language. It's not that the computer is a human being. But amazingly, the computer speaks grammatically appropriate responses, and they are relevant. If what you want to learn is the language, it's really quite surprising. The technology is getting to the point that we might have possibilities for doing this. We all know that in the United States, if somebody goes for a junior year abroad, maybe they've studied Spanish for 4 years, and then they go on a junior year abroad to Mexico City, they come back 3 months later speaking Spanish, right? And that's why we want to send them. And maybe while they're down there, they're not studying grammar books or vocabulary at all. What they're doing is interacting in scenes of classic joint attention, and they're getting very basic stories, but then they don't forget them. They know those very basic patterns, and they can just expand them through blending to more and more and more applications and to more constructions, because they're based in early things. Now there was, yes, this one about culture. See, the kinds of things that I'm talking about are mental operations, classic joint attention, small spatial stories, force dynamics, image schemas, and blending. These are mental operations that, as far as anybody can tell, are crucial for human beings. And every cognitively modern human being in any culture, anywhere, for at least 50,000 years has had them. And anybody in any culture that arises will have them. Now, different cultures do different things with them. As you see, we make new languages, right? Different, and this is the most astonishing thing about the difference between human beings and other species. Other species are very impressive. They can photosynthesize, birds can fly, dogs can smell, and they can communicate in some interesting ways too. And I lecture about this all the time. But for human beings, the amazing thing is their diversity. We say we want to celebrate diversity in culture, but the real question is, why is there any? Why can there be any? If you look at a ringtail lemur, it's got no culture. If you see the ringtail lemurs on one side of the hill and you go to the other side of the hill, they work the same way. Human beings, they date differently, they flirt, they dine, they speak differently, just on the other side of the hill. So they have all these basic mental operations that actually makes them quite creative. And that's where culture comes from, is because you have mental operations of blending that give you the capacity to be creative. So what cultures have is the same basic mental operations, but quite different products. And it takes forever to develop these products in some cases. Writing is at most 8,000 years old, right? Really, writing is only a few thousand years old. Now, nobody anywhere at all thinks that human beings invented part of their brain for writing. No, writing is blended classic joint attention, invention of a symbol system that lets you communicate through writing. But it took, tens of thousands of years for human beings to come up with writing at all. So certainly cultures will influence a lot about language writing. The Chinese has an ideogrammic system. English has an alphabet in which we tend to write down the vowels. Hebrew and Arabic are written from right to left. There's just vast, vast differences, including in the words and the sounds. Chinese is a tonal language. English is not. It doesn't mean we don't have tones. But in China, you can take the same word and pronouncing it a little differently doesn't give you a difference of emphasis. It gives you a radical difference of meaning. It's a tonal language. So you do, the way you learn a particular language will, of course, be impacted by all of these cultural differences. But my assertion is, I realize that this is a radical assertion, but it's the assertion that seems to me to come out of usage-based construction grammar. The mental operations that anybody needs to learn that other language are the common property of everybody. They just have to get deployed right. So next, with GPT-3 and AI that will explore automatic speech recognition, do you think we'll be able to emulate the type of learning one experiences when they live in a new country? No, that's always going to be the gold standard. If you can actually, that's what you're evolved for. If you can actually go and be with other people, and I don't mean walk into the whole hotel receptionist and open your book and read out, do you have a room reservation for me? That's not classic joint attention. I mean actually being in a situation and you see the interesting bird that has just landed on the fountain and you try to get the attention of the person you're with and you point at the bird. And then that person raises their eyebrows and says, pájaro. And you'll never forget the word pájaro again, right? That's a bird, right? That's just what human beings are built for. And if you put human beings in those situations and they keep at it, they get it. You can take any child and drop it into any society and it will get that language natively. It has the mental operations it needs for all of these languages. But from its own culture, it's not going to have all the products that it needs for that other culture. And additionally, what I want to say is that studying, and I really have done this my whole life, that studying grammar books and word lists and practicing putting them together can do pretty impressive things. I mean, I'm sure that there's Spanish that I could read and explain to a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old native speaker of Spanish. That person didn't understand just because they didn't know what I know. They don't have all the knowledge that I have. I mean, they can say the word, but they don't know what it means, right? But I do, right? Okay. You can get that kind of thing through reading the grammar and the vocabulary and so on. But what you can't command is this relational network of form-meaning pairs, which you gradually build up by expressing small spatial stories in classic joint attention. Now, what I'm looking for is something that's close. And I work on this technically. What would it mean for it to be close? Well, it would mean you'd probably be in virtual reality. You'd have a little, visor on, and you would have gloves, right? And the system could see what you're pointing at, and the system would know the room or the park that you're in, and it would say things, and you would say things, and back and forth it would go. So this would take a combination of virtual reality and something like GPT-3, which is text-based. And it used to give me nightmares, but now the easy part is automatic speech recognition and automatic speech generation. That has really soared along because of all these commercial applications where they just want you to be able to talk to the robot and the robot talks back to you, because then you buy things and you get information about your healthcare and stuff like that. That part is the part that's falling in place the closest. Okay. What do you ask the teacher to do and the students to do? Well, what I'd say is, if you can, get out of the classroom, right? Maybe go to the zoo or go to the park or something, and don't have them study anything. Just walk around and get each other's attention. Have them get your attention, their attention, each other's attention, not in their own native language. And then have them try to communicate. And it can be something as simple as, look, that monkey is swinging on the tree. And they point at it, you go back and forth, and back and forth, and back and forth. And somebody says, monkey, right? And somebody who knows the language says back and forth, right? And to build these things up in scenes that are meaningful. And what you're trying to get is not like the interrogative, do you have a reservation that I made by calling you on the telephone? No, you're trying to get a very basic story, like, hand me the cookie. That's where you start. And, give me the cookie. Give me the cookie is the basis for give me your love. Give me your heart. Give me permission. Give me a vote in this debate, right? If you're going to have any kind of sophisticated expression, it has to start in those small spatial stories. So classic joint attention, small spatial stories. Don't worry about the grammar or the vocabulary. The grammar and the vocabulary are supposed to be emergent. You get them later as you go along, right? Start with little bits of vocabulary, little bit of grammar. In trying to get somebody to learn a verb, don't try to get them to conjugate it through the pluperfect. First, let's just get the verb, like, amar, love. So if somebody says, amar leche, and they're not saying, they're not conjugating the verb, okay, that's fine, right? You know what they mean? They'll get it. The appropriate syntax, declensions, combinations, subordinations, making it interrogative, and so on, they'll get that. So if somebody says, want cookie, okay, we know they want a cookie. But if they also say to you, want cookie, but they're offering you a cookie, well, they didn't say it the right way. Do you want a cookie? Would it happen to be the case that in this instance you would desire to have a cookie? Okay, but you're still getting the right story, and it's got a basic story form in it, and it's got some vocabulary. And once they get that, then they can add extra things into the slots and begin to, and it takes children actually quite a while to learn things like I, me, mine, you, yours, theirs. Very frequently, they do this for a long time in ways that we would regard as ungrammatical, but they gradually get it. So I would say to view grammar as something that comes late in language learning, or a knowledge of grammar as something that comes late in language learning, not something that can be taught early. It's not a beginning point. So in the literary mind, I give a lot of importance to the way literature represents the way our brain works. Yes, I think that's quite right. I think there's music all over the world, and the reason there's music all over the world is because of the way the brain works. You will never find a culture that does not have music. What you will find is vast cultural differences in what they did with their mental operations to create music, different systems of modulation, of tonality, it's still a very small, all of the world's music is a small slice of the sounds you could make, right? And it's the same way with language. It seems that language is so vast and immense. There are all these different languages. There are 800 dialects of Chinese. But in fact, the languages that there have ever been or that there ever will be are all a very, very small percentage of the actual sounds and systems human beings could, or that could be used. And we know this because computers can use those things. Computers have no problems. We teach it an artificial language, and we make it work in that way, and it works that way. Who cares? It's a computer. But it's not a system that a human being could ever learn or operate in because the human mind has basic patterns. So what you have are common mental operations, but different cultural products that have been created from those mental operations. So what I'm encouraging us to do is to be amazed by the diversity of language in the world, but to see it as rooted in certain kinds of learning systems where we can actually investigate those learning systems. Classic joint attention, blended classic joint attention, small spatial stories, blending those stories to begin to capture more and more of the world, and this as a way to learn how a language does that. How would I try to apply the blended joint attention to teenage students who are living in a lockdown because of the COVID pandemic? You know, that's, I've been thinking a lot about that lately because, of course, I'm teaching in a COVID pandemic. So it's already kind of nice that we have Zoom, because we're not in the same space, but we are in the same time. We're not in the same time zone, but we're in the same time. That's good. We are interacting here, which is very different from having a student watch a recorded lecture. Okay, you know that I'm right here and I see you. I can respond to your faces, right? I'm watching for attention. You are watching me. This is what we're built for. Okay, it's not the same as being at the restaurant, you know, and having burritos, but it's, you know, it's something. I have I like it when I see a little bit of the space that people are in, because then I can ask them about things. I mean, there's a reason I put a picture on the wall back here, right? Because it tries to create a little bit of a ground of where I am and where you are. We don't have that because we're not in a classroom. But there are other sorts of technical things that I'm trying to do. So I have just ordered from Amazon a document scanner or a document viewer. You know what these are. It's just a camera, and when you put a book under the document, then it shows your audience the book, the document. The reason I want to get this is so that I can draw things, because I think one of the things people do, form meaning pairs, joint attention, is that they draw something. They say, well, you know, if you have a pot like this with a lid like this, see, that's blended classic joint attention. And the pot's not here, but I'm trying to give you something that you can pay attention to that through a representation link stands for the pot. Well, people are really set up for this because of classic joint attention and small spatial stories and blended classic joint attention, trying to get your attention. So I feel that although in the slideshow, I can present them the example from a poem or a sentence or even a pot, it's not the same thing as if I write it out. They see me writing it out. They see me sketching it. And then maybe I say, well, you sketch something. So I'm trying to include in Zoom, and there are technologies for this. You just put in the app cases where we can draw for each other, sketch for each other. It's like a blackboard, right? You can go to the blackboard and sketch something, right? It's anything I can do technologically to get a little bit more to classic joint attention, I am trying to do. And I would say the first thing is this lecture is being recorded, and that's terrific. I think it's wonderful that people have lectures, but notice that if you were watching this and it was recorded, you would still see it as a scene of blended classic joint attention because I'm looking at people, they're looking at me, they're introducing me, I'm responding to their questions. They could interrupt and say, but wait a minute, it would be a good idea. How about this, right? So it's fine for there to be recorded lectures, but the recorded lectures should already have a lot of classic joint attention in them. And it's probably best if they see it synchronously. It's probably best if they actually are in the room with you, as it were. And then they can go back and look at the recording, because then it's not just a talking head with no audience. It is, and no interaction. It's a blended classic joint attention scene. They may not have been in the audience, but there you go. Could I please recommend an English grammar book based on construction grammar? Yeah, I will. What I would say, a book that's easy to get is, and I'll just type it in here, is the Oxford Encyclopedia of Construction Grammar. In particular, look at the work by Thomas Hofmann, who's German, whose English is perfect. It's flawless, just incredibly good. And he's a great analyst. And ask him. He has a survey of some of these kinds of things, but ask him. Actually, interestingly, historically, construction grammar was sort of the basic way to look at things. If you look at classical antiquity, classical Greek, classical Latin, the grammar books were very often, I mean, to the extent that they had grammar books, but they viewed things as constructions. So they'd say, well, there's some things where you assert something, and there's some things where you ask a question, and these are constructions that you learn. So I can say, tú quieres leche, but I can say, quieres tu leche, right? So the form is telling you this one is a fact or an assertion, and this one is a question. This one is indicative, and this one is interrogative by subject verb inversion. Now, beginning in about the 1950s, we developed a number of theories of linguistics according to which constructions were just epiphenomenal. But that was strange because historically, classical antiquity, the basis of language was viewed as constructions and learning constructions. And an awful lot of school grammars taught constructions. And in fact, if you look, I'll type another thing here, Fillmore, Kay, and O'Connor, regularity and idiomaticity, the case of let alone, it's in language. This is a very early article, which basically lays out this view of constructions, that we've been dealing since the 1950s with theories where constructions don't really matter, but in fact, constructions are the fundamental thing. And that was sort of the beginning of construction grammar. Now there are a lot of construction grammars. Adele Goldberg, for instance, worked under Charles Fillmore. And there's an international conference on construction grammar every year. And so it might be that one could revive some earlier forms of teaching a language that were closer to blended classic joint attention, where you're learning basic constructions for small spatial stories as the place to start. Because after all, that's how kids learn. Now, no, I don't think that blending is language specific. I think everybody's got blending, and that it operates in the same ways across all cultures, across the last 50, 60, 70, 80,000 years. But what cultures do with it, the products they make, are often radically distinct. Now, I'm asked by Atenas Letizia, do I think that with AI-mediated conversations, the need of communication is compromised? And I think that's a brilliant question because human beings have a fundamental need to communicate. And it turns out that these days, although as you can guess, the people who know me, like Sergio, know that I can talk 24 hours, 7 days a week without even stopping. You won't be surprised, right? But a lot of my communication these days is actually not with a human being because I work in the robotic AI world. And I find myself wondering, okay, in my lifetime, my thought and my communication style were not formed by anything except talking to people in environments. But I do feel some differences when I'm interacting with AI, and I wonder what kind of effect that would have on 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds. If the 3-year-old is talking to an avatar, right? I just think that's uncharted territory. Yes, developmental, so Said Poblano says developmental disorders like autism or ADHD can affect joint attention. How? Well, actually, I've written that up. So here's this book right here. Why not? Let's try this. I'll share my desktop. There is here we go. So if I find the right book. Yeah, so I found this a crucial question, still do, of course. In The Origin of Ideas, it's about 6 years old. I have a long section on joint attention. And I talk about the theories of there being a special human capacity called theory of mind, and so on. And I take up the work of a number of scholars who have worked on joint attention and autism. And what I would point out is my work on people in the autism spectrum, and I spend a fair amount of time with people who are actually on the autism spectrum. You understand, of course, we don't even know if it's a spectrum. There's not an awful lot of understanding of the etiology of the causes of autism, or even if it's one thing, or if it's a lot of different things. It's an open scientific question. But the line that I push is that people on the autism spectrum, at least those that are high functioning enough that we can interact with to test, are perfectly good at blending. It's their mind with another mind. This is one of the fundamental bits of blending, is that you create another mind. So when you see somebody, you have no access to their mind, or you listen to them, you have no access to their mind, no direct access, whatever at all. All you have are forms. You can't see that they're interested. What you can see is that their eyes are open, right? You can't see that they're angry. That's an inference. What you can see is that their face is moving in a certain way, and you can hear a sound. So you can ask them questions, but again, that is just voice. You can scan their brain. I work with those kinds of fields. Those tools are very, very blunt. Getting into the human mind is very hard. There is no direct mechanism whatever. And so what we like is science that takes as many different methods as possible. And what you like to see is different methods, each with its weaknesses and strengths, pointing in the same kind of direction. And okay, so we don't know that much about autism, but when you when you see another person, you have no direct access to their mind, but you do have to your own. You know that you feel pain, that when you look like that, you're attentive, that when you're behaving in a certain way, you mean such and such. And you blend them and you give to that other person features that you only know from yourself. And then you start to develop it a little, right? You know, maybe you like spicier food than I do. That's unlikely. I'm from San Diego and I like very spicy food. But you see the point. You create this blended concept of another person that has emergent property, but you can only get it by projecting to it things of your own. Well, there's it's often claimed that Asperger, high-functioning autistic people have a hard time understanding that other person, and indeed they do. But it's not because they don't have a blended concept that there's another mind. They have a very strong concept that there's another mind. But very often they think that you're more like it than you are. So they might assume that you will be interested in anything that they're interested in. Might assume that you will want to hear what they have to say. So in fact, in those cases in autism, it might be that they have an extra specially strong theory of mind instead of a weakened theory of mind. That is, an extra strong theory of mind where more of the projections in certain kinds of way come from them. So if you look at the facility for drawing among people on autism spectrum, it's often extremely high, right? And the blends are often extremely creative and really powerful. So it's not the mental operation that I think is differing on the autism spectrum. It's that the usual way of operating is being blocked for some reason. It's not achieving the same kind of product, the same kind of theory of mind as is what we would produce. In the same, but that's not all that unusual. So, you know, when I produce language and someone from China produces languages, they're two different things. They have the same basic mental operations, but different kinds of products. And in this case, people on the autism spectrum have, for reasons that I think go over in The Origin of Ideas, but are still scientifically very poorly understood. This is an open scientific empirical question. They have some interference with or a different path towards constructing other minds. Okay, so we've gone from everything. So Ernesto Hernandez Rodriguez asks about metaphor and blend. As I discuss in The Origin of Ideas, and Gilles Fauconnier and I discuss in The Way We Think, what we call metaphors are certain kinds of blends. Most blends are not metaphoric, and even the ones that are metaphoric will have parts, have most of their parts not metaphoric. But blending and metaphor is a crucial thing. Metaphor is one of the products that we can produce by blending, and basic metaphors are cases where you get a blend that's become entrenched and is somewhat frozen, and even the vocabulary is exported. But you can always wake it up and do a lot more blending that's not in the basic metaphor. Yeah. So I am also a metaphor theorist. I view metaphor as a great product, a certain branch of blending. Are there materials? There are materials for ESL based on cognitive linguistics. So if you look at the Georgetown linguists, Andrea Tyler, Viv Evans, people like that have produced textbooks that try to consider teaching foreign language by using cognitive theories. So let me just type in Viv Evans. His name is Vivian Evans. He's a guy, and people often don't realize that. So I've been in many conferences with him where people walk up and say, "You're Vivian Evans?" And the answer is yes, he's Vivian Evans. So go to his website and look for textbooks on foreign language teaching from the point of view of construction grammar. I'm not a fluent speaker of Norwegian. In fact, one of the great things was that my wife and our 3 sons were in Norway with me for a year when I was at the Center for Science and Letters, the Center for Advanced Studies for a year. They came with us. It was great. We were right there in Oslo, had a great time. And my third born, who was in junior high school at the time, got a great kick because after we were there for a few weeks, he was correcting my Norwegian pronunciation. Yeah, Dad, you're getting it wrong. And he had it right. And that's just the way it is. He would go, everywhere I went, I spoke English, right? Everywhere he went, he spoke Norwegian. So his Norwegian in the space of, and you understand, I spent like 3 months trying to study Norwegian before I went to Norway, right? And I studied Old English, and I'm supposed to be an expert in English linguistics, right? Norwegian is really, really close in some ways. But he went there, he was in scenes of classic joint attention, engaging with people in an environment, and his spoken Norwegian got to be much better than mine all the time, very quickly. Okay. I'm still looking at these. Sergio, Sylvia, Patricia, do you see questions that I haven't? Yeah.
I'm not sure.
So here's this one from Laura Aurora Hernandez. In the most advanced levels of learning. Yes. Yeah. Could you just ask a question rather than my translating it? Can somebody ask the question in English? Are we able yet for learning grammar to be a consciously explicit activity in the school, right? In the classroom. Is that what that means? In el aula, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, keep talking. Say some more. Are you Laura that I hear?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, keep it. Okay, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mark. My question is about in advanced levels, you can use the grammar for talking about the language itself.
Yes.
So
I think.
What's your opinion about it?
I think, I don't want to be interpreted as saying, listen, everybody throw away the grammar books and the vocabulary list. No. Anybody who's learning a language, they know English. They go to school when they're 5, 4, and they start to learn, or Spanish, they start to learn things about language. They start reading things that are a little beyond them. They hear things that are beyond them. They learn new words. They hear people use a new expression, and they talk about it. So they talk about Spanish in Spanish. Now, I think that it's clear that that's indispensable for people to have an advanced knowledge of the language. So linguists have an advanced knowledge of the language. They have a knowledge of the language that native speakers would never dream of. Native speakers of a language almost always have ideas about the language. They think they know how they speak, and they're completely wrong. And you can show them in an instant that they're completely wrong. No, that's not how you're doing it, right? So to get more advanced knowledge, you need to use the language to talk about the language. It's an amazing thing that human beings can do this, right? Because in blended classic joint, okay, so let's just go back a minute. In classic joint attention, we say, hey, Jesus, you see that blackbird in the bush has a red stripe on its wing, okay? Well, one way you blend is you're still talking directly to Jesus, but you're not talking about something you can perceive. It's not in your ground. So the Spanish language is not anything we can perceive. Where is it? Is there such a thing? Is it an object that we can point to? No, of course not, right? But you can blend that with the blackbird, with the object of attention. And now I say something like, well, consider the absence of pronouns in Spanish, right? I don't have to say yo trabajo. I can just say trabajo, right? Now I'm directing you, I'm getting your attention and I'm directing it to something, and it's syntax. It's not a blackbird. But notice I can do that because I have little ways of getting your attention and directing it to something. And then we have we have joint attention. It's blended classic joint attention because what we're seeing is not something in our ground. It's an abstract thing. But it's still the thing. And if you look at gesture and even sign language, people will say, well, Spanish works one way and English works the other. So, for instance, in Spanish, and they've put Spanish here and they put English here. And when they want to get your attention and direct it, they'd say, but, that's not what we would say. And what they mean by that is English. They're doing this and it means English. Why? Because they put English here, right? It's sort of like a blackbird or a stone or something like that. You're still feeling that you're directing people to this and that and the other. So I think it's terrific in slightly more advanced stages to use the language to pay attention to the language and begin to talk to people about grammar. But that doesn't seem to be about grammar and vocabulary. But that the traditional ways that I've used my whole life do not seem to be the cognitive linguistic sources of actually learning a language. They need to come a little later. That's what I would say. Okay. So in the classroom, there's plenty of room to talk. In the aula, yes, there's plenty of opportunity to use these things, but that's not where to start, right? It's quite true, by the way, Stephanie Ramirez, that a career in AI can begin with a degree in linguistics. It certainly can. And a lot of my students trained in linguistics learn something about computation and then go and get employed in the computer sector. They work for Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google. I consult with those places. It's very common for somebody to get a degree, a double major in linguistics and data science, or cognitive science and computer science. These days, it's just extremely common. It's a pathway. It's a well-recognized pathway. The industries send recruiters to our universities looking for people who know both linguistics and coding. Yeah, so that's, I teach in the applied data science field, and Hen Lab is, of course, dedicated to multimodal communication, theory mostly, but we spend a lot of time developing computational, statistical, and technical tools. We have run Google. Google has paid students to work for us for the last 6 summers. It's called Google Summer of Code. They produce amazing things, and often what they produce is coding for linguistic systems, like automatic speech recognition, for frame recognition, frame blending, diarization, all kinds of things. So you look on Hen Lab and see Google Summer of Code, and you will see where a lot of those people go and get employed. And many, many of my students take courses with me in linguistics, and at the same time train themselves in natural language processing, natural language understanding, natural language generation, just because the world is burningly interested in these things. All of your apps, everybody wants to combine these two. Okay, I'm running out of things here. Has anybody got some? Sergio, I appeal to you.
Yep.
Amigo.
I think there was a question that you probably didn't respond to, but I'm not
Yeah.
sure. You probably did, but I just probably got distracted. So I'm gonna put it in the chat.
Yeah, down at the bottom, right?
Yeah, what do you think about online lessons? I'm not sure if
Yeah, online lessons I think are of course great. If that's what you got. I do think that there are some great advantages, even under the pandemic, to being able to have video conferences and so on. But that's largely if you already know people. So I have a vast network all over the world, and I used to fly around all the time. But Red Hen Lab has been running sophisticated video conferences across time zones since 1999. I used to have a video conferencing system that I built in my 1959 Volkswagen bus at Stanford. It had a satellite, and I could connect to people. Now it's very, very easy. I'm not so sure that things can go forward with only that. So if you're having face-to-face meetings and conferences in some classrooms, at least what I see in Red Hen Lab is having the online functionality is very useful, but maybe at most half and half. And I will point out that the history of online lessons is very, very bad. You may know that there were all these MOOCs, these courses, lots of money put into them, right? And lots of people enrolled, but the success rate was abysmal. Almost everybody dropped out, nobody completed them, and nobody could figure out why. But I have an idea why, and that's because these things did not combine enough classic joint attention. It was just a talking head. And that is not what human beings are built for. Now, it's true, if you're already really good, you know, like you're an expert. I mean, suppose I want to learn something new about Greek oral formulaic poetry, and I see somebody give an online course on advances. Well, that's okay. I've already got the whole matrix. I already know exactly what I'm listening for, and this is a new thing. And okay, that's fine. I'm not sure that that's working. That purely online is working very well to give people the basic matrix that they need in order to be able to learn at more advanced levels, right? But it's a great experiment that we're going through. I wonder, you guys must all be running online lessons. I'd love to hear what your experience is. For example, do you think your students are learning? And is there a difference between the beginning students? Take EFL, for example. How are online courses going? And is there a difference between the beginners and the people who are much more advanced? What's your experience? You're the experts.
I happen to have a question of my own, if that is okay.
Sure. You have done so much work, Sergio. I think that you are owed so much more than just a question of your own.
Thank you, Mark. So I've been thinking about your book, The Literary Mind, and these narrative schemata. And for quite a number of years, I've been thinking how I could apply that to the teaching and learning of English as a second or foreign language. And I was wondering, what about Aesop fables? You know,
yes, that's just what I was going to say.
Yeah.
That's just what I was going to say, is you start with a very simple little story.
Yeah.
And you get people to make a fable. It's just an exercise. I've done this in class.
Yeah.
You get them to make a fable. So you can start in either way. You can take something that's like, okay, there was a boy and wanted to learn something and couldn't learn it, and so decided it was too stupid to be learned. He was too smart to learn it. Okay. Now, what I want you to do is to tell that story to a 3-year-old and use animals. What I want you to do is, and I point out, I also have them make proverbs. I say, okay, here's look before you leap. Now, you don't ever say to anybody who is actually physically about to leap, look before you leap. I mean, it would be funny if there was a big rain puddle and somebody wanted to leap over the rain puddle and you looked at them and you said, look before you leap. It would be kind of funny, right? Because you would be using this proverb literally. The reason you have that is notice that this is classic joint attention. There's one person and another person and a puddle. And you can both see the puddle. And I can see that you're going to leap. And I draw your attention to the puddle. I look from the puddle to you and I say, look before you leap. Now, this is a very tight scene of classic joint attention and a little story. You say, okay, now I want you to find a big story. Like, I don't know, getting married or moving to India or enrolling at UNAM, right? The Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico. You're going to move there. Okay, yeah, that's big. It's got thousands of agents and times and difficulties, and you have to figure it all out and blah, blah, blah. And I want you to take this little scene of classic joint attention, which is a story, and take this big story and blend them. Now you go and do that. And I find that, and I've done this even in language teaching. And one, they love it. They love blending stories. They motivated, and it's grounded in story and parable. Yeah. And so I think I have found it to be a very useful language exercise, one that really engages them, much more than memorizing a script for how to talk to the hotel clerk.
Much more.
They don't find that interesting at all. They'll do it, but it bores them to death. And whereas this other one is very interesting. So if you develop anything like that, I'd love to see it.
Yeah, I'm in fact working on that in my free times, which I don't have that many. So I would just like to elaborate this idea a little bit further, if that is okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Please feel free to communicate with me.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, and I'll share with you what I've got. You show me yours, and I'll show you mine.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about, let's say, the fable of the turtle and the
Achilles. Yeah, the turtle and the hare.
Yeah, that's I think almost universally.
It's terrific. Notice there are only like 2 agents.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And people use the story of the tortoise and the hare for things like companies like Facebook and Twitter.
Yeah.
And they'll say, well, of course, these vast things like China is moving this way and the United States is this way. And, China may look like the tortoise, but in fact, it's going to win because these are traditional ones. But if you just look at the way people try to understand the world, it's very commonly these blends of small scenes where people are in the ground, small number of agents, small number of events. It's one of these basic stories. In this one, it's a race. 2 things are moving and one is getting ahead. It takes something like that and try to apply it to, vast things like how are we going to defeat the novel coronavirus?
Yeah, that's true. Now, please let me give you an example of how I think I could proceed on this on a practical basis. What if I first show pictures of the turtles and the hare, but I don't speak at all to my students, and all they have is this visual input in which they get the story. and then I ask them to tell the story without me having provided the linguistic.
Yeah, yes. Have them tell the story. Now, of course, they're going to say, I don't even know the word for tortoise, but it doesn't matter. They can point at it and do things, and then, adelante, rapido. Some words will come in, and when they start to say something, you'll just echo them a little, just a little.
Yeah.
You'll say back to them something that they said, but in a slightly different, maybe a slightly more mature form. And if you watch, this is what parents and child providers do with children all the time. The kid says, cookie, and the parent says, oh, you want a cookie? Yeah, I think you could have a cookie. Maybe not now. Maybe after you have a bath, then you could have a. Okay, so it didn't teach the kid the grammar of, do you want a cookie? But it took the kid's story and said it in a slightly more mature form, right? And I think, Vygotsky and a lot of others have had this notion all the time that what the teacher is doing is working transactionally, giving the learner just enough scaffolding to move forward, but not too far forward, and working with what the learner is producing. Just you loan the learner a little bit of your expertise, just enough for them to handle and just enough for them to move forward. It's called the zone of proximal development. What you want them to do is to move one step, just one step at a time, one. Not way out here, and to learn other things at the same time and so on. No, you just give them enough scaffolding so that they can move like one step forward. And you notice this is how, if the child's trying to climb something, you might give them just a little lift. And then they can climb the rest of the way. So this theory of learning, the zone of proximal development,
yep,
is really, in a way, what I mean when I talk about usage-based construction grammar. That you're working on what they produce in an environment, giving them basic constructions and moving them forward just a little. Now, once they've got that and it's really solid, and I do mean solid in the way that a 5-year-old's language is solid, or 4-year-olds.
Yeah.
Once they've got that, then they have a basic matrix that works. It may not be good for everything, but it really works. They can run it, they can do it, they can say whatever they want about anything and learn more forms and more, but it works. Once they've got that very basic working system, then you can add into it all you want. Then you can begin to talk to them about the system itself, about the grammar and so on. And that would be this sort of zone of proximal development, translated into linguistics terms, is usage-based construction grammar.
Would you agree that the meaning is not, in this example we're working right now, the meaning is not really in the words themselves? I mean, it's
I always say that, see, part of what's so useful about construction grammar is construction grammar is very clear that there are forms and there's meaning. And meaning is something that is constructed mentally. Now, that doesn't mean alone in your head, because you and I may work together to construct meaning, but we're doing that by using forms. So when somebody who knows a language or a communication system, when they want to communicate something to you, they think, not consciously, of course, they think, what form meaning pairs do I know? Including pointing and rolling my eyes and looking to the side and seeming shocked and everything else. What forms do I know that I could put together? What form meaning pairs do I know where I could put the forms together into a performance, because that's what you're doing when you communicate, is you perform. You perform blended forms such that the other person would think, huh, what form meaning pairs do I know that could have been combined into that performance to produce that performance? And once they have that, then they know, then they have a network for constructing the meaning. But they're doing all the work to construct the meaning. They're using external things like other people and the night sky and their iPhone and things like that. Sure, sure. But they're constructing the meaning. It's very important. Words do not mean, expressions do not mean, gestures do not mean. These are all forms. And so construction grammar focuses on how people are prompted by performances to construct a meaning. Sometimes it doesn't work quite right. You say something and somebody didn't understand that you were being ironic, or you said, I can help you with that by looking here now, but they didn't know what you meant by that. You thought they did. They thought something else. And then they say, hey, wait, where are you going? I thought you said you could help me with that. And you say, oh, I didn't mean the laundry. I meant I could help you with fixing the broken mailbox. Okay. So, you know, you can, it's not at all perfect. On the contrary, we spend a lot of times repairing and so on. So I think that's just exactly right. What we want to, here, the way I would say it is, one of the things we do in blending is collapse things. And one of the basic vital relations in mental networks is cause and effect. But we often collapse the cause and effect. And in fact, we even use the words. So if I call somebody, if I say that something is a warm jacket, a warm coat, well, of course, unless you have a coat that has its own electric power to make heat, there's no such thing as a warm coat. If you throw the coat out in the snow, then the coat is just the same temperature as the snow. The coat does not generate warmth. What it does is insulate you. You generate the warmth, and the coat stops the wind from taking the warmth away. So the effect is that you are warm.
Yeah.
The cause is that there's a coat, but which by insulating you makes you warm.
Yeah.
But you call it a warm coat, right?
Yep.
Now that's not strange. People do this all the time. They collapse cause and effect. I have zillions of examples of this. You call somebody a loud man. Well, what's loud are the sounds he makes, but somebody can be sitting there silent for an hour, and you can call them a loud man because he's the cause and the voice is the effect. So you collapse the cause and the effect, and you use the word from the effect to be a feature of the cause. We have pallid death. There are terms for this in classical figures of speech. Okay. Well, one of the biggest cause-effect compressions we have is a form can prompt you to construct a meaning.
Yeah.
If I say Universidad Nacional Autónomo de México, that's just a form, and you get the meaning.
Yep.
So the form was the cause, and the meaning is the effect, but we collapse them. And we say, oh, the word sangre means blood. It doesn't. It's a form. It's a form for prompting you. Words don't know that they have any meaning. You know, it's like a table doesn't know it's a table.
Yeah.
You know this is a table, but the table doesn't know it's a table, right? And in the same way, the word is just a form for the human being to use as a tool for constructing meaning. And that's very important for us to understand in second language acquisition.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if you do that, you think, you know, if you get somebody to memorize the vocabulary, then you might think that they've got part of the language. But in fact, what you need is that form to be used by somebody to prompt somebody else to construct a meaning. And unless you have that scene going on, then you don't have the basic nature of language.
Yeah.
What you've got is something else.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Very, very, very good. By the way, the humanists, when they were studying classical languages, very, very good. Hi, Vahisha. So very, very good. I mean, you know, the first dictionaries in the 14th century and so on were just words lists of unusual words, because, you know, people didn't know those words. They knew the language. They knew Latin, but they didn't know that word. They knew Latin because they had church Latin and things like that. But there were all these classical words and even conjugations and declensions that they were recovering from classical languages that they didn't know. So they had these word lists. So I think, you know, once people have the basic thing, you can have a lot of help that gets them to expand stuff, but they have to have the basic functioning operational system of communication before that kind of attention to grammar and additional vocabulary can be effective. I mean, one of the things we find in second language acquisition is people memorize all these word lists again and again and again and again, and a year later they've forgotten them all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to deviate a little bit from what we are discussing right now, because there are a few comments in the chat that you would probably wish to say something. Vihisha, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, but she's pointing out.
You are.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. That Indian culture has exactly what you're saying, animals and a proverb.
Yes. Yes. It's extremely common. Thank you, Vahisha. That they, I mean, yeah, in Greece we have Aesop's fables, but in Indian literature they have the same kinds of parables with animals. They do slightly different things and they have different messages and so on, but what they have is basic scenes of basic interaction, and they blend those parabolically in order to produce morals.
Yeah, that it could be interesting to get a copy of those stories and check if they could be applied to or adapted to the.
Yeah, they're called Panchatantra stories in Indian.
I think I'll look for those. And then we have another comment from teacher Laura Vallejo. Beginners seem to be learning more. Of course, we're using other resources besides the every other day video conference. Advanced classes lose motivation very quickly. John Lopez Figueroa. Instead, I have my students write competitions using the new concepts and vocabulary. Cecil Sobrevilla Moreno, there are some activities that requires joint attention and that can be done online. For example, simulating ordering food online in pairs or groups. It implies exploring real options as well as making and communicating choices.
That way, look, those are both wonderful, but you know more about those things than I do, and I have not seen those methods. If you have anything, a blog, an email message, a short article, or even an assignment that you give to people, I'd love to see it. I'll share it with people I know, and give you a footnote and tell them, you know, get in touch with you. You understand that this question about second language learning is something I get asked about all the time. And I work with 3 separate universities in China on exactly this question, because they have massive educational systems where they're trying to teach foreign languages.
Yeah.
And they want to know how to do it better. There's a group at the Ohio State University, which is about 2 hours from here, where they have an East Asian center, and they are experts in teaching foreign language in East Asia. So they and I go over and talk and so on. As I said, this is extremely important. The amount of time, money, effort, human capital that is going into trying to teach and learn second languages around the world is absolutely immense. It's something like, you know, I always wondered why engineering schools had entire departments of petroleum refining. And that is because if you could improve petroleum refining by 1/100%, It
Yeah.
saved you billions of dollars, right? And in the same sort of way, we are operating at a scale with second language learning. If we could improve it just a little, that would already be a tremendous win.
True. It's true. I think Ligisha said goodbye.
Yes, she did. She waved goodbye in the window.
Yeah. And Daniel Diaz, I think he's got a question. I guess he wants to voice it out.
Please, please.
So yeah, Daniel, go ahead.
Danya,
Thanks, amazing teacher. Good evening.
good evening.
Will, I have many questions for you. The first one is, well, I'm Mexican, no? And I'm in classes for a basic course. So, what do you think that it's the main point about learning this language? To practice or to learn the grammar one? Because we saw that, for example, there are many ways to learn, no? And we can saw that I'm sorry, we saw that maybe there's a futuristic language learning environment that will be maybe a very good idea in the future. But what do you think, or how do you think that it's the correct way to learn? Talking about practice.
Yeah, I would say that for starters, whatever works is great. and and some different people have different ways of learning in different circumstances. I would say that it's like learning grammar versus practice is not very clear distinction, because it depends on what kind of practice you're doing. You can
Okay.
have practice where you're just trying to learn the grammar. So you're talking to somebody and you're trying to take a verb and conjugate it as many different ways as you can. So you start off with tengo hambre, I'm hungry, and then you practice with, and then they say, oh yes, and she also is hungry, and they used to be hungry, and you're supposed to keep going and practice these kinds of things. The kind of practice that I'm saying cognitive linguistics usage-based construction grammar sort of supports is a practice where you're in a scene of joint attention.
Okay.
Start with things you can actually perceive and communicating about them, where it's important. I mean, suppose you and somebody are at the beach and you're actually going to go swimming in the beach, okay? And you want to find out about, where can you get a surfboard? Those are scenes of classic joint attention in which you're trying to get somebody's attention and direct them to something, and you have some sort of, and it's right in front of you, right? What I would say is it's not so easy to, and I know why we do it. We say, okay, let's imagine that we're in the restaurant and I'm the waiter. What do you say to me? And that's supposed to be practice. We're simulating, but it's a problem because you don't see the food, you don't smell the smells, there's nothing in the environment to point at. So the reason I'm suggesting that maybe we look a little bit at some of these futuristic environments is that the simulation can be closer to actual joint attention, right? When you think babies and mothers are always communicating about the actual scene that they're actually in. They're not practicing and they are not pretending, right? So what I'm trying to do is to get the idea of pretending out of it, because pretending doesn't seem to be a way to learn language. It might be a way to make your language better, but it's not sort of a way to get the basic stuff. So when I'm talking about practice, I mean practice in a scene of joint attention where you share the ground.
Okay, that's amazing. And Will, for example, if we talk about the grammar rules and all the time of the verbs, how do you think is the better way to learn it? Because we know that all the verbs have a lot of time, no? We have the participle, we have obviously the infinitive. So which is the best way for you to learn that time of the
Well,
verbs and obviously the
look,
grammar?
if it's all you've got, memorizing these things is very, very useful. So I memorized a bunch of things about Demotic Greek, and I didn't know anybody who was Greek. I was in San Diego, California, and I just memorized these things. I went to Greece for the first time when I was 16. I hitchhiked across the United States, went to Europe. It was the 1960s. Everybody did that with a backpack and no money in the 1960s. And, I made it down to Greece, and I had memorized all these verb conjugations. And when I got there, it helped. But oddly, the way it helped was when somebody said something and I sort of understood it, then on reflection, I could think, oh, wow, they just used the imperfect. Sort of after the fact, I could analyze it. But I don't feel that having memorized the knowledge of the grammar, and sometimes, I know things about the grammar of some languages like 17th century French and so on that a lot of native speakers don't know, right? I've never been in a situation where I could actually think about that stuff fast enough in the moment, right? That it didn't actually make for fluent conversation. What it did make it easier to do is to analyze. When something worked, it made it easier for me to analyze why it worked. And that was helpful. That was definitely helpful, right? But it's not a substitute.
Okay. Well, my last question is, for example, I have an activity with my students that is to know other teachers or maybe native persons, no, to practice the listening and obviously their speaking, no. Well, what do you think that do you think that will help my students to
Oh
learn,
yeah,
and
look,
how?
with the first time Skype came along,
Okay.
I advised somebody to set up a company. We used to have pen pals where, like, my sister would write to someone in France and write in French. So this would have been
I don't understand.
1966. My older sister, no, 1964. My older sister was in high school, and she wrote, actually in 1962, she wrote to the person in France and in French, and that person wrote back in English, right? And she ended up being lifelong friends with this person. I know this person. They came over and stayed with us, and it was wonderful and everything like that. And I think that was very helpful because it's blended classic joint attention, but it's in a letter, but you're still getting somebody who's a speaker of the language trying to get your attention and direct it to certain kinds of things. Well, I said, well, when Skype was invented, I said, listen, why don't you just make a company that's pen pals, except you do it by Skype. So you have somebody and for the first 15 minutes you speak Spanish, and for the next 15 minutes you speak English, and you both get a great benefit. And I think that those kinds of things are terrific. I think all kinds of things are terrific. I think watching movies, not dubbed movies, but watching movies in a foreign language is useful. All these things are very, very useful. And so having them practice with a native speaker, where you have a native speaker on the two languages, I think it's terrific. What I'm saying is that if we look at the cognitive linguistics, what are the cognitive mechanisms that people have for learning a language? Well, they have a lot of analysis and they have a lot of memory. They can do a lot. They can memorize. They can do a lot of things. But one of the ones that we're really missing is classic joint attention, the communication of very basic stories again and again and again, and gradually by blending, extending those basic stories to cover more and more, but by blending. So, he hammered the metal flat is a resultative. Somebody performs an action on an object and the object has a result. But I can say Roman imperialism made Latin universal. Now, universal is not a very interesting, I mean, it's not a very common adjective. It's not a very common result. Flat is a result. Universal, what's that? Latin is not an object. You can't bang on it, you know. And Roman imperialism isn't an agent like a person who has a hammer. So he hammered the can flat, and Roman imperialism made Latin universal. In their meaning could not be more different. But the second one is a resultative. It's a little resultative story, and it's anchored in our understanding of resultatives, and languages give us very basic ways to communicate a resultative story, right? So this bit of classic joint attention, little stories about stuff that's in your ground, and then gradually by blending, expanding the range of those stories is something that cognitive linguistics would really share is that these are basic mental operations that all human beings have and seem to be indispensable for language. So what I'm saying is we teachers of language might think about how to try to use those human powers to teach language.
Okay, very good, teacher. So, thanks and Will. That's all for my part. So, Will, thank you.
Well, there's
Thank you.
one more, and that is, can I introduce a book and the topic of cognitive linguistics? Sure, I can. There is a what you want is there's a handbook of cognitive linguistics, and if you go to markturner.org and you look for handbook of cognitive linguistics, you'll see that I have a chapter in that book. And what it does, it's entry, all of these are entry level, and they will introduce you to basic ideas of cognitive linguistics, like cognitive grammar and joint attention and usage-based theories and things like that. Okay? Thanks to everybody. It's been wonderful. I hope the pandemic lifts. I hope you are all safe and sound, and I hope to see you in Mexico sooner rather than later.
Thanks a lot, Mark. It was a pleasure, and we hope to see you around when things get better.
You
Have
sure will.
a very nice night, and thank you for being here. Thank you very much. We really appreciate this.
Bye-bye. Thanks to you, and thanks for your patience.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thanks. Thank you, teacher. So that's all for now. I'm going to close the meeting. If there are any questions about today's lecture or anything else, please reply to the email that I sent today, and we will be very glad to respond to any inquiries. So that's all for now. Thank you so much for being here. See you later.
See you later. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.